Today is Erev Rosh Chodesh, so that means that the truth is, it's probably fair to say that tomorrow is the bridge, because tomorrow is the 30th of Sivan, which is considered Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. And whether you say it's today, Erev Rosh Chodesh, whether you say it was yesterday, Shabbos Mevorchim, either way, we're at the stage now where we transition from the month of Sivan to the month of Tammuz. And actually, on the face of it, they're very different months, actually. So the month of Sivan, which is the third month on the Jewish calendar, is the month directly associated with the giving of the Torah. That's the highlight of this month, of the month of Sivan, is the fact that that's when Hashem gave us the Torah. So it's a month of holiness. It's a very positive month. It's a month that indicates a very deep relationship between us and Hashem. The fact that we dedicated ourselves to Hashem, that we said Naaseh v'nishma, we're in, boots and all, we're going to do whatever the Torah says. It's a very positive, upbeat kind of month. And then the month of Tammuz, which we now enter, somehow doesn't seem to have any of that pizzazz. It seems to be a much more low-key kind of month. First and foremost, because we're after the story of the giving of the Torah. It's almost like that's behind us. That was a great moment in history, and now it's behind us. Whereas the month of Tammuz, which doesn't really have any major Yom Tov in it, seems to be more a month of you're on your own. Go out there and do what you have to do. And then it gets worse than that, because the month of Tammuz has, in the middle of it, the 17th of Tammuz, which is a horrible moment of history. The 17th of Tammuz represents various things that went wrong in Jewish history, but the first of them was the golden calf, and by extension of that, the breaking of the first set of tablets. So these 2 months seem so diverse, so different. Sivan, the month of the pinnacle of spirituality, interaction between us and Hashem. Tammuz, the month of failure, of Jewish rebellion. They really seem quite different to each other and unrelated to each other. What's very interesting about it is that almost every year, the Shabbos that bridges the two, the Shabbos Mevorchim that blesses the month of Tammuz, which obviously is still in the month of Sivan, is the story of the spies. And that's really strange, because the spies are also a story of failure, at least on the face of it. Moshe sent them to the land. They were supposed to come back and tell how amazing it is, and we've got something to look forward to, and the miracles are going to happen. Hashem promised us that we'll conquer the land, so it's got to be good. So on the one hand, they had so much going for them, and then they come back and they apparently mess it up. They come back and they say, the people are too strong and the cities are too fortified and it's a land that swallows its inhabitants and there's no way in the world that we'll ever be able to conquer the land. So it seems to be a story of failure, which raises the question, why do we always read that story right at the end of the month of Sivan, bearing in mind that in Judaism the end of a process is usually the apex of the process. So the month of Sivan is the time of the giving of the Torah, which is all about spirituality, connection, inspiration, and wonderful things. And now we're at the end of the month, so we've kind of reached the zenith of that whole experience. What do we start to read about? The failure of the spies. That should have been in the month of Tammuz. The month of Tammuz is the month of failure. That's the month of the golden calf and all the other horrible knockoffs and spin-offs that happen from that. So how does this all work? One of the interesting insights, and there are a few, but one of the interesting insights is that the month of Sivan is the third month of the Jewish calendar, and the month of Tammuz is the fourth month, and the numbers are not accidental. Remember that in Torah, you represent numbers by letters. So the number 3 is the number Gimel, is the letter Gimel. And the number 4 is the letter Dalet. So the sages tell us, Gimel Dalet, you can actually hear it in the words, Gimel Dalet, Gemoil Dalim. That the word Gimel comes from, or is related to the word Gemoil, which means to extend goodness or to extend assistance, like Gemilus Chasadim, which is goodness and assistance and aid that you give to other people. By the way, not like tzedakah. Tzedakah is specifically to poor people. Whereas Gemilas Chasadim, you could theoretically do to anybody. You could be kind to anybody, accommodating of anybody. So Gimel comes from the word Gemoil, which means to assist. Dalet comes from the word Dal. Dal is a person who is very poor. So Gimel, Daled, Gemoil, Dalim. That the association between these two letters and the reason that they follow each other in the alphabet is to teach us that Gemol Dalim, you have to, the one who is the has needs to give to the one who's the have has to give to the one who's the have not. Even the depiction, the physical visual depiction of these two letters actually tells the same story. So a Gimel is a bent vertical line with a little extension coming out. That's supposed to look like a person who's running. So you kind of bent forward with one leg out, running enthusiastic to go and help. The Daled, if you look at a Gimel and Daled next to each other, so the Daled is turned away. It faces away from the benefactor because usually the person who's on the receiving end is a little bit shemzech, a little bit embarrassed. So he turns away, he doesn't want to have to be face to face with the person who's helping. So even the visual depiction of these two letters, Gemoil Dalim, is the same principle of giving and receiving, of the have and the have not. So the third month of the year is the have, Sivan, and the fourth month of the year is the have not, Tammuz. The third month of the year, that's where there's divine revelation, there is the giving of the Torah, there's inspiration, there's connection, there's goodness. Half the month we don't say tachnun. It's a very elevated kind of an experience of a month. Very jam-packed month. That's where Hashem pumps us full with resources. Hashem is the Gemoil. He's the one giving us the resources. But the purpose of those resources is not for this month. You don't give somebody the resources for the good times. You build them up with the wherewithal for the not such good times. So the purpose of the month of Sivan, it's not like there was a good month and then Nebuch, unfortunately, everything fell to pieces and now we're stuck in the month of Tammuz and it's such a negative time. The purpose of the month of Sivan was to prepare us in advance for the month of Tammuz. Like the expression that says, Makdim Refuah Lemaka, that Hashem's style is that he first creates the healing and then he introduces the illness to the world. So that by the time the illness is around, the healing has already been taught to us. Our job is just to discover what Hashem has already told him, what Hashem has already installed in the world. So basically we should tell this to the coronavirus people. The answer is already out there. It's just a matter of discovering it instead of thinking that you have to invent something from scratch. So Gemoil Dalim, that's the message of this transition from Sivan to Tammuz. It's a message for us. Look, if you want to know the truth about human beings, this is the truth about human beings. We have our moments of inspiration and we really love and embrace them while they last. We also know somewhere in the back of our minds that they're not going to last. We all know that at some point we're going to feel adrift again, we're going to feel empty again, and then that's actually when the trouble begins. So Gemoil Dalim is a message for us. You need to know and you need to understand that long before the dry spell hits, Hashem has already filled you with all of the resources that you need in order to be able to make a success of that dry spell. In fact, that's really what happens in Tammuz. Most people, unfortunately, read the story of Tammuz at a highly superficial level, and they don't really appreciate what's going on over there. But once you start to appreciate the story of Tammuz, you'll appreciate that it's not a story of failure. That's only the beginning of the story, but it's not a story of failure. It's a story that begins with a failure. But it's not a story of failure. In fact, that's the reason why we read the story of the spies while we're still in Sivan. Because the message we want to convey over here is that if you read the story of the spies, you think that it's a story of failure. And you write them off and you say these were terrible people who wrecked our national prospects. We wanted to have a land and they totally wrecked it for this nation, for that generation, that they were unable to go into the land of Israel. That's how you read it at face value. We specifically put the story of the spies into the month of Sivan to tell that a failure is not ever 100% a failure. It actually just depends on what you do with it. As the line that somebody sent me last week goes, falling down is not failure. Not getting up again is. You don't choose to fall, it's life. That's what happens. People fall. That's why Hashem made us human, because he did not expect us to constantly float at the right altitude and never mess up. He designed us to fall. It's part of our makeup. It's part of our wiring. It's going to happen. That's not the point. The point is not that you fall. And the point is not to become depressed over the fall. The point is to know what to do once you have fallen. So you take the story of the spies. Yes, on the face of it, it was a terrible disaster and it was a terrible failure, but that's on the face of it. Actually, when you dig just a little bit more deep into the story, what you discover is that the spies, although they messed up with their last comments, the land's impervious, there's no way we can get there, it's not going to happen, their first comments were actually on the mark. Their first comments were, it's a beautiful land. That's how they started the discussion. It's a beautiful land. And want to know something interesting? Those comments stuck. So 40 years later, when it was time for the Jews to eventually enter the land of Israel, and it was a new generation, most of those people had been young children and had not even been aware of what was going on at the time of the spies. Funny thing, they didn't ask, please, could you send spies to check the whole land from top to bottom again? Why? Because the first spies had succeeded in getting that message across. It's a good land. You don't have to question it any further. And so they didn't. And they were ready to go. And all they needed to know was the technical, strategic details of how we conquer the most key city, Jericho. Likewise with the story of the golden calf. Yes, of course, it was a terrible story and things went totally awry. But what came of that story was that Moshe rebuked the Jewish people. They acknowledged that they had done wrong. They petitioned Hashem to re-accept them into Teshuvah, which he did. And then he gave them not only the second tablets, but what's really important for us is he gave them a day on the calendar called Yom Kippur, that every single generation until the end of time could use that opportunity to come back from the brink. So Gemoil Dalim, we have to understand that the transition from Sivan to Tammuz is not that you had a wonderful party and now's the hangover. It's not that you had this incredible inspiration and now you're going into the doldrums, so just be warned. It's to say that that incredible period of the giving of the Torah has changed us. It has empowered us. It has given us the wherewithal, the skills, the insight that we need for when the difficult times hit, because they will. And we don't have to be defined by them. We don't have to be trapped by our distractions and temptations. We don't have to become stuck in our laziness or depression. We have been empowered that whatever is going to happen to us when we are left to our own devices, which is what the month of Tammuz represents, we'll be able to use it as a catalyst for rebound, for depth, for growth, and for an even deeper connection to Hashem than what we would have had if he was doing all the work for us. So it's quite an